How does one man, armed with little more than a rifle, grenades, and sheer force of will, stall the advance of an entire enemy division? This is not a myth, nor a work of fiction. This is the story of a soldier who turned himself into a one-man army, who waged a private war deep behind enemy lines. His target? The vital supply routes that served as the lifeblood for a German panzer division. His mission? To cut the artery, to cause chaos, to buy time for his comrades regrouping miles away. For 72 relentless hours, he would become a ghost, a phantom haunting the forests and roads of France, his actions echoing far beyond the bullets he fired. This is the story of an act of defiance so profound it would become the stuff of legend. This is how one man cut enemy supply routes for 72 hours, and in doing so, stalled a division.
The date is August 13, 1944. The location is the dense, rolling countryside of Normandy, just south of the Falaise Pocket. The Allied breakout from the Normandy beachhead, Operation Cobra, has been a staggering success, but the fighting remains fierce and fluid. German forces, though reeling, are conducting a desperate fighting retreat, trying to extricate their armored units from the closing Allied jaws. Our story centers on the U.S. 90th Infantry Division, known as the Tough Hombres, and within that division, a 22-year-old staff sergeant in Company K, 3rd Battalion, 359th Infantry Regiment, named Forrest P. Frosty Walker. Walker was a farm boy from Kansas, a man accustomed to hard work, open spaces, and self-reliance. These were traits that would soon be tested in the claustrophobic confines of the Norman bocage.
The strategic situation was critical. The German 2nd Panzer Division, a veteran formation of the Eastern Front, was attempting to disengage and fall back to a new defensive line. Their route of retreat, and more importantly, their route of supply, ran along a key network of secondary roads near the village of Mortain. The 90th Division's objective was to apply pressure, to harry the Germans, to prevent them from regrouping. But intelligence suggested a massive German counterattack was imminent. Every hour the 2nd Panzer was delayed was an hour the entire Allied front had to prepare. It was during a brutal patrol action on the 13th that Walker's platoon was caught in a devastating ambush. A sudden barrage of mortar and machine gun fire erupted from the tree lines. In the chaos and confusion of the close-quarters battle, the platoon was forced into a fighting withdrawal.
In the smoke and the deafening roar of the firefight, amidst the cries of the wounded, Sergeant Walker became separated. By the time the surviving Americans had regrouped at their company command post, Walker was nowhere to be found. He was listed as missing in action, presumed killed or captured. But Frosty Walker was very much alive. He was behind enemy lines, completely cut off, with only his M1 Garand, a handful of grenades, his field pack, and the grim determination to survive. He had a choice: hide and wait for a chance to slip back, or fight. Walker chose to fight.
Alone in the twilight, Sergeant Walker assessed his situation. The sounds of German vehicles, the distinct grumble of Opel Blitz trucks, and the deeper-throated growl of half-tracks were constant on the road nearby. He was deep in the underbelly of the German war machine. He could see a seemingly endless column of men and material moving east, reinforcing the front he had just been forced from. Hiding in a thicket, he watched a convoy of fuel tankers rumble past. He saw ammunition trucks. He saw staff cars carrying officers. This was no mere patrol route. This was a main artery.
His initial thought was survival. He needed water, and he needed to get his bearings. But as he observed the unopposed traffic, a new, audacious thought began to form. He wasn't just a lost soldier. He was a weapon, positioned perfectly behind enemy lines. His orders had been to harass the enemy. He decided he would do just that. His first target was a lone German motorcycle courier, speeding down the road with a satchel of dispatches. Walker took a careful breath, steadied his Garand against a tree, and squeezed the trigger. The sharp crack of the .30-06 round echoed through the valley. The motorcycle swerved violently and crashed into a ditch. The rider lay still. Walker didn't move for a full 10 minutes, waiting, watching for any reaction. None came. The single shot had been lost in the general noise of the front. He had drawn first blood.
By dawn on August 14th, the Germans knew something was wrong. A supply truck was found disabled, its engine block cracked by a well-aimed rifle grenade Walker had fired from a hedgerow. The driver and his assistant were found nearby, killed by precise rifle fire. The local German command assumed it was the work of a Maquis partisan group. They dispatched a squad of infantry to sweep the area. Walker, meanwhile, had found his perfect strong point. It was a small, stone-built farmer's hut, nestled on a wooded rise that overlooked a key crossroads. From this position, he had a commanding field of fire over 2 separate roads used by the Germans.
At 10:30 hours, the German sweep squad arrived. 8 men, moving in a loose skirmish line, began to advance up the hill toward the hut. They were confident, expecting to flush out a few poorly armed French farmers. They were not expecting a hardened infantryman. Walker let them get within 50 yards. He took the first man with a shot to the center mass. The second, a machine gunner, fell before he could even set up his MG-34. The remaining Germans hit the dirt, scrambling for cover. For the next 20 minutes, a fierce firefight erupted. Walker, using the superior range and accuracy of his M1, pinned the squad down. He would shift position between firing ports, creating the illusion that there was more than one defender. He tossed his last 2 fragmentation grenades down the slope, their blasts causing further confusion. Convinced they were facing a strong point, the German squad leader ordered a withdrawal, dragging their wounded with them. Walker had won his first defensive engagement. The afternoon of the 14th saw a change in German tactics. The sporadic traffic on the road ceased, and ominous quiet fell over the crossroads. Walker knew what it meant. They were bringing up something heavier. At 1600 hours, the silence was broken by the methodical thump of mortar fire. 81mm rounds began to walk the hill, sending shrapnel and stone fragments flying. The hut's roof was blown apart. Walker huddled in the sturdiest corner, the world shaking around him. The bombardment lasted for 10 agonizing minutes. As the dust settled, he heard the sound he had been dreading, the clanking of tracks. A German SD KFZ 251 half-track, mounting a 37mm anti-tank gun, had moved into position at the edge of the tree line. Behind it, a full platoon of infantry fanned out. This was no longer a probing attack. This was a deliberate assault to eliminate the nuisance. The 37mm gun fired first. The high-explosive shell slammed into the front of the hut, blowing a large hole in the stone wall and stunning Walker with the concussion. Shrapnel whizzed past his head. He was now completely exposed. Through the dust and smoke, he could see the German infantry beginning their advance, using the covering fire from the half-track to move forward in bounds. This was the moment of absolute crisis. Forrest Walker was alone. His position was compromised and crumbling around him. His ammunition was dwindling. He had maybe 2 clips left for his Garand. Against him was a combined arms assault with enough firepower to level his position entirely. The odds were not just stacked against him, they were mathematically impossible. He was looking at his own death, mere minutes away. The German infantry, emboldened by the artillery and the presence of their armored support, grew more aggressive.
They were now within 100 yards, and their MG-34s were stitching the hut with fire, keeping Walker's head down. The 37mm gun fired again, this time hitting what was left of the roof, sending a cascade of timber and tiles down upon him. He was trapped, pinned, and about to be overrun. He thought of his platoon, his friends, some of whom he had seen fall just days before. He thought of home, of the Kansas plains that seemed a world away from this Norman hellscape. A cold, grim resignation settled over him. If this was to be his end, he would make it costly. He would not be taken alive. He chambered his last full clip of ammunition. 8 rounds, 8 final acts of defiance. As he prepared to make his final stand, his eyes fell upon the one weapon he had not yet employed, the one tool that could possibly counter the armored threat, the bazooka. In the initial ambush, the platoon's bazooka team had been hit hard. The assistant gunner had been killed, and the launcher itself had been dropped. In the chaos of his own withdrawal, Walker had scooped it up along with a single, solitary rocket. It was a desperate, heavy burden to carry, but he had held on to it. Now it was his only hope.
The problem was the range and the exposure. The half-track was nearly 200 yards away, a long shot for the inaccurate 2.36-inch bazooka. To have any chance of a hit, he would need to get closer, much closer. And that meant leaving the relative, though crumbling, safety of the hut and advancing directly into the German infantry assault. Taking a deep breath, he slung the M1 Garand over his shoulder and hefted the bazooka tube. He crawled through the shattered back wall of the hut, staying low in the crater-pocked earth. The tall grass and the smoke from the mortar barrage provided fleeting cover. He could hear the shouts of the German soldiers as they advanced, their boots crunching on the debris. He was moving perpendicular to their line of advance, a ghost in the smoke, his heart pounding in his chest like a drum. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to hide, to surrender. But he pressed on. He moved 50 yards, then 75. He found a shallow shell crater that gave him a clear line of sight to the half-track, which was now about 120 yards away. It was still too far. He needed to be inside 80 yards to be confident. He would have to move again, into the very teeth of the enemy advance. This was the crucible. This was the moment that separated a soldier from a legend.
Forrest Walker made his decision. It was not born of reckless bravery, but of a cold, calculated understanding of tactical necessity. The half-track was the key. Destroy it, and he shatters the backbone of the German assault. The infantry would lose their heavy support and their confidence. He loaded the single rocket into the breech of the bazooka, the click of the connection, a sound of finality. He then began a low, crawling advance directly towards the German line. He moved with a hunter's patience, using every fold in the ground, every patch of thistle, every shell hole for concealment. The noise and confusion worked in his favor. The Germans were focused on the hut, pouring fire into it, unaware that its sole defender was now flanking them. He could hear their guttural commands, see the shapes of their helmets through the smoke. He was now behind the lead elements of the German skirmish line. He reached a small earthen bank. It was the best he was going to get. The range was now just under 90 yards. He could clearly see the commander of the half-track, standing in his hatch, directing fire. Walker shouldered the heavy tube. He took aim, leading the vehicle slightly to account for the rocket's slow velocity. His world narrowed to the sights of the bazooka and the side armor of the SD KFZ-251. He exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger.
The rocket ignited with a brilliant whoosh and a trail of white smoke. For a heart-stopping second, it seemed it would fly harmlessly past. But it flew true. The shape-charged warhead struck the half-track just below the commander's cupola. There was a flash of light, followed by a deafening explosion as the vehicle's own ammunition cooked off. The blast was catastrophic. The hatches blew open, spewing fire and smoke. The German commander was thrown from the vehicle. The intense machine gun fire from the hut's direction ceased instantly. The effect on the German infantry was immediate and total. The sudden, violent destruction of their armored support, seemingly from an unseen attacker to their flank, caused panic. They had no idea how many Americans were in the woods. They broke. The orderly assault dissolved into a chaotic retreat. Soldiers scrambled back down the hill, dragging their wounded, leaving their dead behind. The crossroads fell silent once more, save for the crackling of the burning half-track.
Walker did not celebrate. He dropped the now useless bazooka tube and unslung his Garand. He was still behind enemy lines. He was still alone, but he had bought himself more time. He spent the remainder of the day and the following night, August 15th, playing a deadly game of cat and mouse. He shifted his position constantly. He set up new ambushes on different stretches of the road, firing a few shots at a truck, disabling another with a well-placed grenade, then melting back into the impenetrable Norman countryside. He was no longer just defending a position, he was waging a guerrilla war. He became a specter, a story the German logistics troops told each other, the phantom of the Mortain roads.
On the morning of August 16th, the lead elements of the U.S. 90th Infantry Division finally pushed forward, meeting only light resistance. As they advanced through the crossroads, they found the scene of Walker's private war, the shattered hut, the burned-out husk of the German half-track, the bodies of several German soldiers, and then, from the trees, emerged a gaunt, exhausted figure, his uniform torn and filthy, but his M1 Garand held high. It was Staff Sergeant Forrest Walker. He had been behind enemy lines for exactly 72 hours. In that time, through a combination of sniper fire, ambushes, and sheer tactical brilliance, he was credited with killing or wounding at least 15 German soldiers. He had destroyed one SDKFZ 251 half-track and disabled at least 3 supply trucks. But his true impact was immeasurable. The constant harassment, the destruction of key vehicles, and the belief that a significant Allied force was operating behind their lines caused critical delays for the German 2nd Panzer Division's supply convoys. For 3 days, the flow of fuel, ammunition, and reinforcements to the front was severely disrupted. This delay contributed directly to the division's failure to reorganize effectively for a counterstrike, buying precious time for the Allies to solidify their positions around the Falaise pocket. For his conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity, at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, Staff Sergeant Forrest P. Walker was awarded the Medal of Honor. The citation reads, in part, "His courageous and determined stand in the face of overwhelming odds served as an inspiration to his comrades and exemplified the highest traditions of the military service." Walker survived the war and returned to Kansas, a humble hero who rarely spoke of his 3 days of hell in Normandy. His story is a testament to the profound impact a single individual can have on the tide of history. It is a story of initiative, of courage, and of the unyielding human spirit facing impossible darkness. This was just one of countless untold stories from the warfighter. Subscribe to the Warfighter as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.